Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, major trading partners of the United States decry Washington's new tariff proposal, rejecting forced labor allegations. U.S. House votes to stop Iran war in rebuke to President Donald Trump. The World Health Organization says Ebola outbreak and a response is catching up. UK orders Google to allow publishers to opt out of AI scrapping for search summaries. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, a U.S. proposal to impose new tariffs has triggered widespread backlashes from its major trading partners. The Trump administration has proposed new tariffs of up to more than 12% on imports from 60 economies, claiming that they have failed to ban or adequately restrict U.S. imports made with forced labor. China's foreign ministry has described the U.S. finding as a pretext for political manipulation. Mr. Bernard Lang, chairman of the European Parliament's Trading Committee, has also termed the U.S. finding utterly absurd, adding that the European Union has already adopted very tough rules targeting forced labor. Brazil has also rejected the proposal by Washington, saying there is no justification for the measures. The proposal is now subject to public comment due by July the 6th and hearing on July the 7th before any final decision. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Zhou Mi from the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Zhou Mi. A bigger context, I guess we need to keep in mind is that earlier this year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that President Trump exceeded his legal authority by using emergency powers to impose broad tariffs on trading partners of the United States. So, with that in mind, do you think this latest proposal by the Trump administration represents a bid to rebuild its own tariff regime after legal setbacks?
Well, I think that it is true that the United States is now suffering a lot from the fiscal deficit, not enough income compared with its expenditures. So tariffs is one of the main solutions to deal with these problems. The Donald Trump administration want to collect more tariffs from other countries, and they believe that kind of measurement is good for the balance of the fiscal income and expenditures. So when the Supreme Court forbidden its so-called reciprocal tariff, they want to have something in replace of the original ones. So they issued the 122 tariffs from all these economies around the world for 10%. I don't think that is enough for them to try to deal with its fiscal imbalance problems. So they also launched several kind of different investigations, including the 301 investigation like this one, to try to find out some of the possible ways to end some more and new tariffs. So I agree with you that it is kind of excuses they want to use to collect more tariffs instead of the old ones.
So, like you said, this so-called forced labor investigation is linked to Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. So, is it pointing to the growing importance of Section 301 in the Trump administration's, trade policy or trade tool of choice?
Well, many people just describe the 301 measurement as one of the nuclear weapons of the United States administrations on the trade issues. So 301 is our kind of concept to trying to address the challenges of so-called unfair practices by the foreign governments and also the trading partners. I think that because they have launched quite a lot of the 301 investigation, and many of them are still there. Like what they have put in the practices by collecting the tariffs from China on the many of these high-tech products, and some of these products they deemed to have some relations with their intellectual property rights protection. I don't think that is are really are very useful or very good reasons for them to launch those kind of investigation. But to be honest, I have to say that U.S. government do not have many options trying to end some more tariffs. So they use 301 more and more frequently, and seems to be more addicted to this kind of usage. I think that is are really surprising practices because when United States joined WTO, and they promised that they were not trying to address the problems by
Hmm.
using the 301 investigation, but trying to use the WTO dispute settlement mechanism to deal with that. And they have lost some of these cases, raised by other members of WTO on the 301 practices. And I think that no matter from its own promises or from the multilateral system, it seems that the 301 is not a good option. And I think that is definitely a threat to the globalization and also the multilateral systems in the world.
Hmm. So, in your opinion, this is more like a nuclear bomb in the trading policy, but nowadays it seems Washington or the Trump administration is getting a little addicted to it. So,
Yeah.
in the meantime, another observation about this latest proposal is that a tariff measure is pursued first, and only then does the Trump administration move to find a suitable legal justification for the measure? What is your take on this?
I don't think that, when some countries want to identify the other countries' practices and they do not want to hear from the other side, would be a good way for this kind of complaints or justification. So, although there are not so many arguments towards 301 in the United States itself, but I already found that so many bad things happened in the relation between United States and other countries, like the supply chains are under pressures, the inflations are becoming more serious, and also the unemployment could become one of the very important threat to the society's liabilities. So it doesn't have to say that the other treaty partners are trying to retaliate about that practices. So the legal justification is a basis for U.S. Trade administrations or legislative or administrative branch of the United States, because according to the Constitution, only the Congress has the right to have more tariffs and try to decide how many they can collect from the international trade. So they authorized a certain part of its power to the administrations, but I don't think that they will just make the administrations to, like the White House, to use or abuse the use of the 301 in an unlimited way. So I think that is definitely not just from the international region, but also from the domestic governance and also the balance of the powers that the administration should not try to abuse the use of these 301 practices.
Hmm. Now, while the proposed measures we're talking about here cover 60 economies, including China, the report by the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative that announced this particular proposal is actually devoting undue attention to Chinese linked supply chains, including cotton, polysilicon used in solar panels, and critical minerals. What do you think this tells us?
Well, I have to say that when you're looking at the announcement or statement of United States about the so-called forced labors, I don't think that they are trying to trying to say that China is the target. But to be honest, in the past several years, we have seen many of these arguments to do with so-called forced labor. And in all these kind of cases, they, as you mentioned about the silicons and also the cottons, they really trying to put China as one of the targets. So it seems that there are so many not so good activities to do with China's practices in that way. So I would say that based on this kind of announcement or statement, any other countries, maybe they will take it for granted that China is abused the use of that, and they will also trying to identify themselves as one of the good country or economies to deal with these problems, like the protecting the rights of the laborers and also trying to support the fair competition. So there seems to be a lot of very discriminative judgment based on that kind of announcement, and I would say that is definitely what we do not want to have or having
Hmm.
the impression for many economies to follow that suit.
Hmm. We know China has just hosted US President Donald Trump for a very high profile state visit, during which China and the United States agreed to build a constructive relationship of strategic stability. So, how do you expect China to respond if new U.S. tariffs are really imposed on China and Chinese goods based on a so-called forced labor investigation?
Well, my understanding that when we have reached that consensus that, as you mentioned, to build our constructive strategic stabilities, we really want to hear some the news from the United States and also the actions from them. If they are trying to make it our kind of excuse to have more pressures on China, I don't think that we will accept that. So based on all these, all these actions that happened last year, I think that we have showed the world, especially the United States, what we would like to do when we are facing some unfair challenges from them. I think the results are very clear that when they are trying to pressure China and doing that, they will not get what they really want to have that. The consensus, the good performance, or the certainties only comes with the negotiation and the talks. So I believe that we have reached some very good consensus on the possible ways of dealing the relations between our two sides by the leaders. We need to fulfill this consensus and make it into the reality instead of just trying to abuse that or trying to have some more and more excuses to say that I will still stick to my principle. I don't think that would be the natural way, especially when they are trying to deal with the relations with China.
Hmm. When forced labor allegation is abused, when it is being used as a pretext for launching trade investigation and imposing subsequent tariffs, how do you think this is going to negatively impact the real global effort that is needed in terms of fighting against the real forced labor?
Well, I need to say that China is always committed to protect the rights of the laborers, and we have signed the agreements and some of the treaties in the International Labor Organization, the ILO. So we have put it in a large effort to deal with the unfair practices or illegal practices. So if they are trying to identify this concept with some ideologies, consideration, or certain kind of discriminative or purpose leading practices, I think that the efforts could be divided and many of the attentions will be diverged. And I think that is not so good for us to deal with the problem, especially when you are looking at the fact the people's flows to China and also from China to other countries are becoming more and more, and the interactions between China and other countries are so well established, no matter from the supply chains or the real flow of the people. So the efforts can only be effective when China is willing to deal with the problem. But when we are put it in the mistaken way, I don't think that we will try to deal with the others like they really want to have from us. So we can do more. We would like to do more, and that should based on the fair basis and also our kind of a good understanding about each other. And we have to try to do the things in a more effective ways.
Thank you very much for joining us and for your analysis. Dr. Zhou Mi from Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. You are listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a resolution to limit President Donald Trump's war powers against Iran. The vote was 215 versus 208. 4 Republicans broke party ranks to vote in favor. It is the latest setback for President Donald Trump in the U.S. Congress, even as Republicans continue to hold slim majorities in both chambers. For now, however, the vote remains largely symbolic as it does not carry the force of law. So, for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Gregory Barton, Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University. So, thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Greg Barton. This is the fourth time this year that Democrats forced a vote on the Iran war, and the first time they have attracted enough support from the Republican side to prevail. When the war started, Republicans actually overwhelmingly supported President Donald Trump. Why do you think some of them have now begun to waver?
I think at the outset, when President Trump, as he typically does, showed confidence about the fact that he knew where he was going, what he was trying to achieve, they didn't really interrogate exactly what his strategic intention was. What's become very clear is that America moved into this conflict with Iran at the behest of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from Israel. So Republicans who may have shared that optimistic, confident assertion a couple of months ago have now increasingly lost faith. One thing that drives home a change of view in terms of American political thinking domestically is the price of petrol or gasoline, as they would say. So the price of a gallon of gas has gone past $6.50 American, when it was under $4 not very long ago, under even less than that. So this is putting a lot of political pressure on both Democrats and Republicans. There's midterm elections coming up in November. A lot of people are beginning to really worry about how this is going to play out with voters come November. So that's why we've seen this turnaround.
So, by the way, how much does the passage of this House resolution have to do with the fact that there is no clear end in sight for the Iran war?
Well, that's certainly part of it, because the idea that the president could order sort of emergency action, the justification being that it was necessary to move quickly in sort of a defensive move, that seems increasingly lacking credibility, particularly as this has slipped into a war without any definite sort of off-ramp or end date. And that sort of protracted political requires political support, requires Congress signing off and saying, yes, we authorize this war. And that hasn't happened. The president sort of tried to sidestep that completely. And now I think people are running out of patience because of the political reasons I just said, and the sense that they were told one thing, but that the reality is turning out to be very different.
So do you expect something legally binding to come from the U.S. Congress anytime soon to limit President Trump's war powers?
That's a really good question. Given the way the Republicans control both the lower house and the Senate, that doesn't seem, it seems like the president can sort of wait this out. But it's interesting he's getting as much criticism openly as he is now. In the past, particularly in the lower house, the Republicans who dominate the Congress have been reluctant to speak out for fear of personal reprisals, particularly when it comes to their own re-election or nomination. We've seen that with a couple of recent local elections where the president's turned against people because he feels they've been disloyal. So that's really kept people quiet up until now. But the tide seems to be turning on that, and it seems more and more people will speak out. And so I don't think the House is going to turn against the president just yet, but it's suddenly conceivable that could happen, particularly as we get closer to the November midterms when the balance of risks seems to be less what the president might do to them as individual politicians and what the voters might do.
Yeah. So lawmakers in both the House and the Senate have also expressed the concerns about the cost of the Iran operation. The Pentagon once told U.S. lawmakers sometime last month, I guess on May the 12th, that the estimated cost of the Iran war to date was close to 29 billion US dollars by then. But some outside experts have actually cast that figure as too low. Do you think the concern about the cost of war is legitimate?
It's absolutely legitimate. There's the financial cost in terms of the munitions that have been spent. That has a strategic cost in the fact that you can't easily replace those munitions, including defensive interceptors like Patriot interceptors that are essential for stopping incoming Iranian ballistic and cruise missiles and drones. So that's a real cost. There's also the cost of the damage to US bases. Every single US base in the Gulf region has been put out of action. That's said to run into tens of billions of dollars by itself. And then there's the economic cost. And so it's been said that if you sum up all the costs of this war, it actually goes past $1 trillion, which seems incredible. But, it's beginning to become apparent that this is a very expensive war without any clear endpoint, without any clear strategic gain. The Iranians seem to be damaged and certainly economically badly damaged by this war, but still in a very strong position to inflict asymmetric advantage. They haven't lost that much of their missile launch capacity or their missile stock or their drones. And it seems that in controlling the Strait of Hormuz that America's lost its strategic advantage. This seems to be a loss everywhere. And as I said, if you sum up the total financial costs, it could get to $1 trillion. But the costs are not just financial. It's the loss of American prestige, the loss of American military deterrence, the loss of trust in America. And that's playing out domestically as well, where the public in America is beginning to wonder what this is all about.
So in other words, we have to consider the element of the loss of the soft power of the United States as well, I guess. So currently, Professor, we understand the talks regarding an interim peace deal between Washington and Tehran are still dragging on, and tensions are continue to flare across the Middle East. What do you make of the main choking points for the talks right now?
Well, the main problems are that Tehran feels it has the upper hand, so it feels under no pressure to compromise. It doesn't want any protracted conflict. It's been very damaging for Iran, particularly economically, but nevertheless, the calculation is they could stand months and months of conflict and still come out surviving. From the American point of view, there's no easy options. It's clear that there's no military plan to opening the Strait of Hormuz or forcing a change of thinking in Tehran. So accepting the off-ramp that's there at the moment seems the best option. For President Trump, the question is how does he save face and not look too embarrassed by this? But the real sticking point at the moment is that the regime in Tehran is saying we can't accept lasting ceasefire negotiations unless the Israelis stop their actions in Lebanon, including threatening to bomb the capital, Beirut, but also occupying large parts of southern Lebanon. And that's a very understandable response from Iran. A lot of people are concerned about what's happening with Israeli actions in Lebanon. And it's clear also that many in the Israeli government want to use this as a spoiling tactic deliberately to stop the ceasefire from working because they want to carry on with pressure on Iran. So there's a real split between the thinking of the Israeli government and the thinking of Trump's administration. And that's the real sticking point for getting a lasting ceasefire at the moment.
Thank you very much for joining us. Greg Barton, Professor of Global Islamic Politics, joining us from Deakin University in Australia. More to come. World Health Organization says Ebola response is catching up, and the UK orders Google to allow publishers to opt out of artificial intelligence scrapping for search summaries. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding He in Beijing. We'll be back after a very short break. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding He in Beijing. The World Health Organization says efforts to contain the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo are gaining ground. However, significant challenges remain. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus made the assessment following a visit to the African nation. He says key obstacles include gaps in terms of contact tracing, supply chain disruptions caused by travel restrictions, and the absence of licensed vaccines or treatments for the Bundibugyo strain of Ebola. The DRC in Africa has over 330 confirmed cases, including 60 deaths. So for more on this, my colleague Xu Yawen earlier spoke with Dr. Wu Zhiwei, professor at Dali University in China's Yunnan province.
Dr. Wu, WHO says this Ebola outbreak may have started as early as January, months before it was officially detected. Why is it often so hard to spot outbreaks early, especially in vulnerable regions? And what's unique about this outbreak?
For this particular outbreak, one of the major issues was that the strain of Ebola virus is very distinct from the early outbreaks. It's the Bundibugyo strain, which actually only outbreaks twice in African history, also in the similar region. That was in year 2007 and year 2012. Both outbreaks were small scales, didn't raise much attention in the international community. So I think that was the, now if you look back, it was the kind of oversight. So when the virus was initially discovered in late April, initially it was it wasn't really diagnosed correctly because there was no such diagnostic kit for this virus. So this actually contribute to the spreading of the epidemic, because when they realized it was Ebola virus, it was after several weeks. So that's one of the reasons why this time has such widespread infections.
You mentioned this outbreak involves the rare Bundibugyo strain of Ebola, which currently has no approved vaccines or treatments. Then how close are we to having a workable vaccine, and how worried should the region be about this strain?
Well, I think this time the regional countries should be really worried about this, because if you look at the DRC and Uganda, both countries are bordered with 10 other African countries, and those countries actually, many of them have very weak medical care or public health infrastructures, and also in many of the countries actually it's very hard to reach, particularly in DRC. The epidemic center basically is a very remote area, but also under armed conflict for many years, since year 2021. So those regions actually give a lot of challenge to international aid, because personnel could not get easy access, and critical medical supplies cannot go in. So I think those are the critical issues. In African countries, actually, last week, actually, there were 2 confirmed cases in Kampala, the capital of Uganda. So suggests that there is already spreading out of DRC and Uganda and the regional small cities. So this is something actually concerns should be raised. But for the international community, I think there is a low risk for this virus, because historically this virus never really spread far.
You probably have also noticed the WHO says only about 45% of contacts have been traced, and that figure needs to be above 90% to control the outbreak. Then how critical is contact tracing in stopping Ebola? And what happens when those numbers are low?
Well, you see, for the Bandibuja strain, there is no specific therapeutic medicine and no diagnostic kit and no vaccines either. So the only way to stop this epidemic is through the diagnostics, quarantine, and the contact tracing. So it's very critical that contact tracing is performed and reach a high percentage. So you could stop the people who actually in contact with the infected and going somewhere and spread the virus. So this is not a very easy task in view of the African healthcare infrastructure and also that particular remote region in armed conflict. So this actually requires a lot of community cooperation and the trust, and people, basically get involved in reporting the contact and also the infections. You do have a number of very effective public health approaches, such as the household visiting, interview of the people who are from the epidemic region, and also even use some of the modern information technologies, such as the smartphone and GPS to track the people's mobility. Of course, this is something actually need a broader cooperation.
Let's talk about the budget here. WHO says it needs $115 million over the next 3 months to fight the outbreak, but has only secured about the third so far. So how are WHO and its partners planning to raise the remaining funds? And what role can local governments and international partners play in containing the outbreak?
Well, this definitely is a tremendous challenge because the WHO and other international organizations has mobilized dispatch of personnel and also medical supplies into the region. The WHO is in dire shortage of the funds to deal with epidemic like this because when the US actually withdrew from the organizations, it's the financial situation is really in a bad situation. But I think still there are a number of ways that the local national government communities could get involved. It's not only about the money, it's about the participation and the drive to contain the virus. You can see that since the WHO calls for the international cooperation in this epidemic, there are very positive response from Africa CDC, the local government, and also WHO also mobilize certain emergency medical supplies. The UN system agency and UN peacekeeping missions also respond very positively. I think those are very positive signs. The NGO, such as the international humanitarian medical NGOs, such as the MSF, the Doctors Without Borders, and the IFRC, they all respond. The International Red Cross all respond very positively. I think once the international community cooperate, then it will be able to contain the virus. But my personal perspective is that it will still need some time to have the under complete control.
And lastly, Dr. Wu, so looking beyond Democratic Republic of Congo, what lessons should the rest of the world take from this outbreak to better prepare for future public health emergencies?
Well, I think one of the issues actually we could learn from this Ebola outbreaks. If you look at historically, that a number of major outbreaks actually happened in those two countries. One reason is biological, because the fruit bats and also the mammals in that region carry the virus and spread into human population. The other is that this particular region has been under unrest for a long time. So the government infrastructure, the medical infrastructure actually is in a very bad shape. This actually almost for sure contribute to the a number of outbreaks of the Ebola virus, because you need surveillance, you need quick response teams from the medical point of view to to identify, to contain the virus, becoming a large-scale outbreaks. I think that this is something actually international community should take in consideration, how to build up a more responsive, more powerful network in dealing with epidemic like this scale.
Dr. Wu Zhiwei, professor at Dali University, Yunnan Province in southwestern part of China, speaking with my colleague Xu Yawen. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. China has launched a nationwide digital identification system for humanoid robots to strengthen industry standards and improve safety oversight. Under this new platform, every humanoid robot will be assigned a unique 29-character identification code and tracked throughout its unique life cycle. Authorities say the IDs is going to help trace responsibility, manage risks, and facilitate the industry's large-scale commercial rollout. More than 100 companies, over 200 robot models, and 28,000 robots have already been registered on this particular platform. So for more on this, my colleague Lian Qingxuan earlier spoke with Andy Mauck, author of the book The Innovation Machine: How China Creates and Adopts Technology Through Governance.
The 29-digit ID code includes country, enterprise, product, and serial numbers. So what key challenges is this system designed to address, and what benefits could it bring in practice?
Sure. Well, let me just paint a picture of where this is heading. So at some point in the future, we will have robots that not only work for us, but these are machines that deal directly with one another. So it could be an electric car that charges and pays its own bill, no card, no human involved. A port crane unloading a ship that notices that one of its parts is wearing out, orders the replacement part, pays for it on delivery by itself. Delivery robots covering their own tolls, factory arms renting tools by the minute. This is machines hiring machines, transacting at machine speed with no one in the loop. Now, of course, we're not there yet. Today, robots do almost nothing that touches our daily lives. But this destination is precisely why this moment matters and why we're talking about this ID. So this ID system to give robots an ID number is not just about robots. It's China's way of showing how a state, meaning a country here, can make trust grow as quickly as the machines themselves. And it's, of course, all about one thing: identity. Because if you can't show who can be held to account, you really cannot build on top of that. So it really is all about trust. And for robots, we only need three things. We can name a particular robot, we can limit what it does, and we can stop it. And without a unique ID, we can do none of these things.
And what challenges do regulators face in tracking robots across their full life cycle, from production to recycling?
Well, I think if it's done properly, any challenges or problems that occur are addressable. But I think it's more important to talk about why is this even important. So we have to recognize a robot is not like a toaster, right? So it not only gets software updates, it changes hands, it wears down, it's, doing things, again, ultimately doing things that matter. And what that means is there's risk. So if you can have detailed tracking of, what happened when it left the factory, what happened when it received this particular software update, and we can think of it the way a car carries a service history, right? So when was the car manufactured, what kind of work it had done to it, and of course today, what kind of software upgrades has it had? So this way you can roll back any problematic software updates. You can recall a single faulty robot instead of grounding the entire fleet. So basically, at the end of the day, will be a very powerful data-laden machine, kind of being unable to be tracked.
And for future regulations, should targets be robots themselves or also extend to their software, algorithms, data systems, and operating entities?
Yeah, so I think that's, of course, going to be a very much a case by case legal problem, right? So let's look at automobiles, for example. So if someone does something bad with an automobile, they, of course, as the driver, can be held accountable. But if it's discovered that the manufacturer did something wrong, then of course the company that manufactured the company should be accountable. But sometimes we discover it's a particular part, right, that was the problem. And then perhaps it makes the most sense to hold that parts manufacturer accountable. So I think, the same idea here is that it will depend. And I think, again, this is what China is very good at in terms of developing the principles, the policies, and the framework for proactively creating channels for these to be solved. Not to say there won't be problems, but that these problems are foreseen and there are pre-arranged ways of addressing them.
Beyond regulation, can a unified identity system help standardize the industry and improve interoperability among robots from different manufacturers?
Absolutely. So, again, a unique identity number for each robot is only the beginning. So it's necessary but not sufficient. But then we also have to think about, yes, interoperability, meaning robots working with other robots, will require some sort of standardization, perhaps how they communicate with each other, right, is one way. But again, as I talked about in the beginning, is the world we're moving towards is not just robots cooking our dinners, building houses, but actually robots transacting, meaning engaging in economic transactions, maybe with humans, but more likely with other machines. And when you have that happen without this digital passport, right, where we can uniquely identify the robot and what permissions it has, and we have the ability to have humans revoke permissions, limit what the robot can do, perhaps even shut it down, that really is the foundation for everything that is built on top of it.
Are there any countries with similar identity management systems for humanoid robots, and what makes China's approach stand out?
Well, I think every country in the world, sees this coming and wants to be prepared from a regulatory and a policy perspective. But I think, we really have to compare the American approach to the Chinese approach. And the American approach really is all about remedy, meaning we'll fix the problem after it happens, through lawsuits, through liability, et cetera. But the Chinese approach is more proactive and it's through guidance, right? So it's state the purpose, translate it into standards, develop the policies, the milestones, et cetera. That's not just the technology, but again, the governance. And then when that happens, it actually increases the trust of all elements of society that, this technology is useful, it's trustworthy, and it's welcome.
China is now already a global leader in humanoid robot production, so how significant could this unified identity standard be for international robotics governance, and what impacts might it have on China's role in the global robotics industry?
Well, I think if this all works out, I think what it will show is that China can also use governance as a general purpose technology. Because again, by creating a system that can issue and track these unique numbers that again are the foundation for interoperability, for machine to machine payments. This is very, very powerful within China. Now, what will happen as other countries adopt robots? They also will need some way making sure that someone is accountable, that robots can be identified, that permissions can be given and revoked, et cetera. And whoever has, the most widely used, I think, most effective system will be the one that's adopted. And here I think it's very important to point out that in technology, reputations are made by demos. In history, power accrues through defaults. And I think that as China proves that this system of governance for robots actually works, it will perhaps, maybe even likely, become the global default. And this is, again, has nothing to do with a country saying we want China's ideology, but very, very practical, pragmatically saying, look, we need a system to get the most out of robots while making sure we have appropriate accountability. And the Chinese governance approach is the one that works.
That was Andy Monk, a technology and geopolitics analyst, speaking with my colleague Lian Qingxuan. This is World Today. Stay tuned. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Britain has ordered Google to give news publishers a greater control over how their content is being used by AI services. New rules from the country's competition watchdog requires Google to properly cite content with clear links and to allow for opt-outs for AI model fine-tuning. The Competition and Markets Authority says the new rules are going to strengthen publishers' hands when they negotiate content deals with Google. News publishers in Britain, for example, have reported a drop in traffic after Google rolled out its AI overviews because fewer users click through to the original articles. So for more, my colleague Gao Yingshi spoke with Dr. Liu Shaoshan, Director of Embodied Intelligence with the Shenzhen Institute of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics for Society.
So let's start with the big picture. What are the key driving forces behind this ruling? Is it mainly the lost publisher traffic since Google rolled out AI overviews, or is something larger at play?
Well, I think it's something larger because search itself has changed completely. The traditional Google that we know of, basically you link you to the information you need. It's just an indexing engine. But then with AI in the picture, Google becomes a summarizing engine. It does not just link you to the information, but summarizing the information for you, so that the publisher will lose the traffic completely because they don't have to go to the site. Instead, they can just go to Google and get a summary of the information. I think that's the main driving force. It's the change in search itself.
The regulator used new digital powers here after labeling Google a strategic player in search advertising. How much does it change the game that a watchdog can now force changes to Google's practices rather than just issuing fines after the fact?
Well, I don't think how effective that would be because the biggest question is still that there's no competition to Google. It's by default almost the only search engine out there that people use to search information. I think that's the danger of it. Then regulators can try different ways of regulation, impose a fine, or force Google to do certain things in certain market. But remember, Google also has a very strong lobbying group that can alter this kind of things. So I think letting in more competition would be a better answer than just enforcing one way or the other.
Google will now have to let publishers opt out of AI scraping, cite their content with clear links, and stop using their content for AI training. But do you think that's really workable? Or could publishers end up choosing between AI visibility and search traffic?
I think that's a very interesting question. I hope that there's a third option outside of opt-in and opt-out. By opting in, basically says that they allow Google to index their site to do a summary so that users do not have to go into the site to get information. But in that case, they lose all the traffic. By opt-out, there are two sub-options below opt-out. The first opt-out is that they don't let Google index them at all. Then either way, they lose the traffic because if Google does not index them, there's no way that users can find their information. But the second and more optimal opt-out option is that they still let Google index them, but instead of having Google do the summary, they can let Google just get traffic to their site. I think that's a better opt-out. Basically, it's rolling back to the original Google model. If that's the case, then I think it's more balanced. Depends on who you're talking to. If it's up to Google, of course, Google wants to do the summary because then people do not have to leave Google at all. And Google would provide all the answers, but then that would squeeze out all the publishers. But that's why the question should be handled by the regulator or authorities. If the authorities are in the picture, then the better opt-out would be just have Google roll back to the original model to find a more balanced way between Google and the publishers.
For many publishers, being invisible on Google means being invisible online. In reality, how many will actually use this opt-out, knowing this could cost them traffic?
Yep, another very good question. I think really depends on what opt-out means. If there are two levels of opt-outs, the first level, let's say, we opt out of everything. We don't want Google to touch it. Then Google will not index the site, so there would be no traffic coming from Google to the site. Then the publisher would go out of business because there would be no visitors. The second level is that opt-out of AI summary. I think that's a better opt-out, such that people can still visit the site through Google. It's just that they cannot view the summary of the content from Google. They have to go into the site to get the content they want. I think that's a better opt-out. I think that's a more balanced play between Google and the publishers.
The watchdog says this gives publishers a stronger hand in negotiating content deals with Google. Does it really shift the balance of power, or is it more symbolic given how dependent they remain on Google's traffic?
I'm not sure how much negotiating power they have. It still goes back to the question that it's lack of competition. If we have three players in the game, for example, if OpenAI performs search with their AI capability, and if Anthropic performs search as well, then at least you have someone to negotiate with. There's a competing offer.
Some say this is a fight over who profits from journalism in the AI era. Who do you think ultimately pays the price if publishers and Google can't reach a deal?
Well, in the long term, I think that's a very insightful and very interesting question. I think in the long term, it's the consumer who would pay the price. Because if you let the situation roll out like this way, then Google would pretty much squeeze out all the media and publishers. Then eventually, Google itself becomes a publisher. They can use AI to construct different contents. Then at the end of the day, you would not have any independent publishers out there. So in the long term, I think the very dangerous situation is that the consumers will eventually pay the price.
The British regulation is being called a world first. Do you expect other regulators to follow? And what could it mean for how AI companies access and pay for content globally?
Yeah, I think that's a very good regulation example. I expect the world to follow. If the pilot in the UK seems to be able to find a balance between the publishers and Google, then I think the world should follow. They will set a gold standard. But it all depends on the next few months, how this rule would, what are the outcomes of this regulation. Google is a US company, and within the United States, Google has very strong lobbying power. So I think it has to be the UK that set an example first, and the US would follow, because that would give more evidence and pushing force for this kind of regulation to go through. But if you just leave it to the US market, again, Google has very strong lobbying power within the US market. You have to set an international example to show people that, oh, this is the way to work for it to push through in the US.
Dr. Liu Shaoshan from Shenzhen Institute of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics for Society, speaking with my colleague Gao Yingshi. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. A quick recap of today's headline news. Major U.S. trading partners decry Washington's new tariff proposal, rejecting forced labor allegations. U.S. House votes to stop Iran war in rebuke to President Donald Trump. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.